to our webinar. We're delighted to have Lydia back. It's been a little while since we've had Lydia on our webinars, and we always really enjoy having Lydia here because they're always so useful and so helpful. So I will let Lydia introduce herself and pass over to Lydia, and then we can start the questions. We have a set of questions that I will ask Lydia, and then she will answer. And then, as I say, please put your questions into the chat, and at the end we'll also ask if you have any questions. So over to you, Lydia.
Thank you, Sally. So I'm Lydia Dunford. I'm an associate solicitor at Boys Turner in the Education Department. We advise parents of children and young people with special educational needs, specifically in relation to the EHCP process.
So our first question for you: when can experts be involved in the EHCP process?
So from the start is the earliest, and potentially all the way through. So the starting point is after a parent or young person or someone on behalf of them has requested an EHC Needs Assessment. So that's an assessment of the child or young person's education, health and care needs. That goes to the local authority. As part of that assessment process, if agreed, the local authority then starts getting experts involved. And then experts can be involved throughout the entire process depending on the issues, what needs to be challenged or queried, what needs updated evidence. So that can go all the way up to a final EHC plan being issued. And then beyond that, it can go into annual reviews of EHC plans when you need updated evidence to inform the reviews, and if the plan is still valid and accurate, and also for situations like if there's a reassessment of need as well.
So which experts do the local authority need to use?
So it's potentially quite broad because EHCPs cover a child or young person's education, health and care needs. So it really does depend on the specific needs of the child, and also what stage of the process you're at. The first point, the EHC Needs Assessment, there is a set list of experts or professionals the local authority has to get advice and information from. I can happily, provide this full list to people. It's quite lengthy, but I'll just summarise who is involved. So once they've agreed to assess the child's education, health and care needs, the local authority has to get advice from the child's parent or the young person. That's really important. Educational advice is then usually from the head teacher of the school that the child or young person's at. If they're not attending school, then it's the person who's providing their provision to them. Medical advice, so GP, paediatrician usually. Psychological advice, so that's an educational psychologist. Advice in relation to social care. Often we find this doesn't seem to happen, even though it's meant to, but that is something that should be taking place. Anyone else the local authority thinks is appropriate, so that's potentially quite broad, and again depends on the individual needs of the child or young person, what their circumstances are, etc. Also anyone else that the child's parents reasonably requests is involved. So again, that's quite wide as well. You can then potentially use that if, for example, there are specific experts already involved with the child in terms of areas of need. That might be a way in to say that the local authority needs to get advice in relation to those areas of need as well. And if you've got a young person who's in year 9 and beyond, you're then looking at advice in terms of preparing for adulthood as well. There's also further information needed if a child is visually or hearing impaired as well. So it's potentially a lot of people, and this is at the very first stage of the process. The aim is it's meant to kind of front load everything. This information is meant to be provided from the off. And then going forward, that should then inform if an EHC plan is needed at all. If it is, what's going to go in that plan. But from our experience, whilst some or all of that information may be provided at the EHC Needs Assessment stage, if the quality of it isn't particularly great, then that usually means further evidence is needed from experts going forward, as well. So potentially there's a lot of expert involvement through the whole process.
Maybe if we could, because I think we'll have a fact sheet to go with this, so that might be a useful list to have in the fact sheet, because I think it's it might sort of prompt, you know, some.
It is. It's under some SEN regulation as well, so I can put the link to that as well, because it's quite a useful thing just to know.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So, can I instruct my own experts, and does the local authority have to agree?
You can instruct your own experts. There's nothing to stop you as parents from doing that. Whether the local authority agrees or not, there's nothing to stop you from doing that. Whether they agree with what your experts recommend, that's another thing. They may not agree, but the reasons for them not agreeing has to be based on they've got evidence from their own experts that say otherwise, or it doesn't quite tie up. It can't be because the local authority has effectively a blanket policy saying we will not accept evidence from independent experts, full stop. That is something that should and can be challenged. It really comes down to what evidence is already available, and if this is good quality. So sometimes you may have had local authority experts who've carried out assessments and reports, but actually they don't really tell you anything specifically helpful or kind of clear or detailed. So parents may feel actually we need to get someone independent in who's experienced in this sort of area. They may have worked with them before, they may have assessed the child before, to provide a report as well. It's important to remember that, well, it depends if it's necessary, because obviously independent experts come at a cost. Sometimes there may be treating therapists already involved with a child or young person, so that's another option that parents may use to say, this therapist we're already, say, privately paying, they're already providing therapy, they can provide a report. So that's potentially another option. You always need to think about, has there been any recent evidence, say from an educational psychologist or speech and language therapist or whoever, within recent, we say we kind of within a year, that's generally held as recent. Has there been any of that? If so, your expert needs to be aware, if they're assessing after a local authority one, they need to be aware of what they said, any formal assessments that were carried out as well. This is really important, because if you have two experts who carry out the same standardised assessments within a recent period of time, i.e. a year, for argument's sake, that is then sort of reduces the credibility of the latter, because they say, well, this has already been done, you're just duplicating. So there are ways experts can get around it, and we've had it where experts can say, well, there's other tests I can do, so I'm not duplicating what this expert's found, carried out. But that does usually require the two experts, so your independent one and the local authority one, to liaise. That's not uncommon. That's good, because it's showing transparency. They should be able to liaise and discuss, not necessarily all of their report, but to say, well, what assessments did you carry out? Did you notice anything particular I need to be aware of before I do mine? Did it have to be done remotely? So those sorts of things can happen, and that's information that independent experts need to make sure is clear in their reports, because if they have had any discussions with others, or they have had to check the types of assessment they can do within the timings, that needs to be clear as well, so they show there's no duplication. So that's kind of it. It really does depend on what's necessary, what is lacking. If there hasn't been any evidence from a particular professional recently, then that may well lead to parents saying, actually, we'll get someone in. Often reasons parents do get experts in is because timings from local authority experts can have delays, potentially, if there's waiting lists or things, or just lack of availability. Sometimes independent ones potentially can go in quicker, but not always. It depends on their capacity too. We find with some, actually, they do have quite long waiting lists, sometimes, quite a few months in advance. And then you've got things like summer holidays where people are away to factor in too. So it really does depend as well what you think is necessary at the time.
Can I ask the local authority to cover costs of experts that I instruct?
You can ask, but it's unlikely they're going to say yes. Especially if they've had experts of their own assessed, either at the EHC needs assessment stage when they have to get experts involved, or down the line, in terms of when the plan's being drafted or finalised, or there's an appeal. They're very likely to say, well, no, we've got our reports, you're choosing to get something else, that's up to you, you cover the costs. Potentially there might be more of an argument, this isn't a guarantee, it's just kind of sort of speculation, if there isn't a local authority expert who's available, or there hasn't been advice from within that area of need, say occupational therapy, but the child has needs in that area, potentially there's a bit more of an argument there to say, well, look, parents will, as parents saying, well, we'll get an expert in, but actually you should have done this local authority sooner. We asked you to, for example, we thought it was reasonable based on the child's needs. So therefore we will look to you to cover the costs because you should have done this. Again, there's no guarantee. It does depend on the kind of situation. And also your relationship with the local authority ultimately, and who's been involved. Is there a massive gap that needs to be filled with evidence from an expert, or is it just, you want to get as much in as possible in terms of range of experts involved? It does depend. Nothing to stop you, but it's probably very unlikely that they would readily agree, if at all.
So not that likely, but worth asking.
Yeah, some situations it might be worth trying more than others. You ultimately don't lose anything, by asking. But if you're not sure, I'd say seek advice if you haven't already got a solicitor involved, or because it might be something to bear in mind.
Are experts necessary for EHCP appeals?
Yes, almost certainly for kind of all appeals, I would say, in some level. So appeals was one of the examples I think I just gave about when local authorities might get updated advice from experts. So they do their EHC needs assessment, all being well, they get their expert advice from who they're meant to. But potentially that can be quite a long time before a plan is then finalised. The whole process from requesting an assessment to a plan being finalised, it should take no more than 20 weeks. You go, okay, but there are 3 stages within that where a local authority can say no, and then parents have a right of appeal. Appeals then can take 4, 5, 6 months, we're finding now at the moment, for a timetable. So you factor in potentially up to 3 of them. You're looking at the child or young person's needs could well have changed a lot from that initial assessment back at, week 6 or being well, up to we've now got a final plan that we're not happy with. So that's not uncommon for plans to be drafted on then outdated information, because there's been disagreement about whether to issue a plan at all, whether to do the assessment at all. So most likely, by the time if you get to an appeal about either no to assessing, no to issuing a plan, or the final plan, you may very well need experts in at that point. The point of having experts is to prepare either a new report or an updated report if they've already done one prior for that child, following an assessment, and to specifically address the issue of that appeal. So whether it's an assessment needs to happen, whether they should have an EHC plan or not, what does the expert think, or what provision and what needs should be in an EHC plan. And this is all within their relevant area of expertise as well. That's very important that's something the tribunal looks out for, to make sure that experts don't stray beyond their area of expertise, and to stick with what they know. So if you're in an appeal situation, no matter kind of what stage, both parents and local authority are able to get expert evidence if they want to. Again, it depends on the stage of the process, what's already available. If there's already very recent evidence that, say, you've submitted for an EHC needs assessment request and the local authority said no, you don't need to then look to duplicate what's already been sent in if you've already got evidence. But if it's older, or if there are new issues or new needs that have come to light, then you're probably going to look to get experts in. And factoring in timings as well for appeals. I was saying just now that independent experts can have quite a few months wait list for availability, especially educational psychologists. They get booked up very quickly, so you have to factor that in as well to a potential appeal. So you kind of have to work backwards and think, well, almost prepare for potentially an appeal, or as soon as an appeal is going to be registered, think about what experts do I need to get booked in, for further evidence for a hearing. And really, you want to have experts, this kind of goes throughout the whole process, but you want to have experts who are familiar with the EHCP process, so know what EHC plans contain, what they should be containing in terms of needs provision, that sort of thing, and also have experience of appeals and attending tribunals hearings. That's really important, because if you have an expert who can provide a good report, that's one thing, but also they need to be able to justify what they've recommended at a tribunal hearing, be questioned by others, look into a local authority expert's report in the same area and say, why do they not agree that's enough or different or whatever. So there's a lot of things to think about, and to kind of give you an example of potentially how many experts you could need. I mean, generally for appeals we do, we kind of see anything between sort of maybe 1 up to 3, 4. You could have more experts involved. It depends on the needs of the child and the appeal. So often you find educational psychologists, speech language, occupational therapy, physiotherapists are all very common. But you can have ones like music therapists. You could have psychiatrists. You could have ones in relation to trauma. Play therapy, that it can be really wide. It always goes back to what actually does the child need, what do we need the evidence for, and whilst both parents and local authorities can then choose who they want to instruct, and often you find it's kind of mirrored, so you're both going for educational psychologists and occupational therapists if those are like the main issues. You can get different ones. You can also potentially have the tribunal. I don't think I've ever come across this, but they do have the kind of authority, if there's an appeal, to direct that both parents and the local authority jointly instruct someone to provide evidence. Because I don't know how often that happens, but it is something that the tribunal does have the power to do. Mostly from what we find, however, it is parents, experts, instructed, paid for privately, and then you have local authority experts who are sometimes ones who don't even meet the child. We have seen reports where it's they've had a discussion with parents or the school and that's it. They've not actually, or they've just observed the child in school. They've not actually interacted with them. Really, you want assessments to be one-to-one, directly done in person, with their findings. Did they visit any schools? What other information did they consider? What other experts did they talk to about the child? And clear reasons for their recommendations, and any comments about school, if school's an issue. So there's quite a lot to think about. There's a lot for experts to think about, but if you go for ones, or if we instruct them on behalf of parents, experts who know the process well, have been doing this for quite a long time, that then does stand you in as good a stead as you can hope. And also, I suppose, to bear in mind that they are independent. They're not there to just convey what parents' views are. If an independent expert recommends something that parents don't agree with, they are perfectly entitled to do that. And we could not be going to them to say, well, parents think actually the child, that school won't work for that child, that they need more provision or what have you. They are fully entitled to make their recommendations based on what they find. And then it's for you as parents to kind of take that from, what you will, and say, well, what do I do with this? But generally we find experts usually along broadly the same lines of what parents' thoughts are about schools in particular, but it's not a guarantee. They are independent. That's the key point to remember. They're not there, to just put forward what parents are looking for. They have to independently recommend what they feel is right. Yeah, I think that is basically it. It's very broad. There's lots of things to think about. And I would just say, if you're not sure if you might need experts, or you've got experts and you're already through the process and you're not quite sure what to do, what needs to happen next, then just seek advice. It's much better to seek advice sooner, especially if you're in an appeal situation or thinking about going into an appeal, because once you're kind of set onto those appeal deadlines, you have to kind of work fairly quickly, especially if you need to be booking up experts or new experts or updating instructions or anything. So always seek advice sooner if you're not entirely sure. Yeah, I think that's kind of it in a nutshell. Yeah. Is that it? I think is that the last one?
I think that is the last one, yes. So if anybody has any questions, would you mind popping them into the chat, and then Janet will kindly read them out for us if anybody has any questions.
So it's absolutely fine if not. I know that's a lot to take in, and you know, we can put that on the fact sheet, and I think that has, well, it can have my details on it as well, so people want to contact me directly, then obviously they're welcome to.
Thank you, Lydia.
Lydia, I have a question. Thank you, Sam. Hello, thank you very much. I recently heard the Department of Education announce digital EHCPs. What does this mean?
So I would take that just in the literal sense that EHCPs are going to be electronic and not, you used to have hard copies. They might still send out hard copies to parents now when they're finalised. But certainly yeah, I think for most kind of cases I can think of, you get an electronic copy as well as at least a hard copy that gets posted. I'd have to look into if there's anything more specific to it than that. But I mean, it would make sense for them to be not be hard copies, because everything is kind of going paperless anyway. The tribunal appeals, we are still being held remotely, I think, for the most part. So everything is emailed rather than bringing a paper copy to a tribunal venue. Yeah, I can have a look into it if that needs be. I'm not quite sure what else to sort of add.
Lydia, this is just from me actually. When you were talking about sort of everything being a little bit sort of backed up, is there a huge delay now after the pandemic? We're still kind of not, getting back to normal and having to do face-to-faces and trying to get hold of experts. Is it taking more time?
Well, the thing is, I mean, if you've got an EHCP, or in the EHCP process rather, there are clear timings that are there, and they don't, it's kind of, you have to kind of almost sort of disregard. So, well, so what are their delays or shortages? Because actually, if this is a legal time frame, it has to be adhered to. So for example, if a local authority agrees to do an Ehc Needs Assessment, and all the various experts they have to get advice from, they then have a set number of weeks to then come back to the local authority on. I think it's, I can't remember if it's 4 or 6 weeks, but I can put it in the fact sheet necessary. But they do have a set number of weeks. So a response saying, well, we haven't got enough people or at capacity, that isn't actually, that's not good enough. You can kind of sympathise and say, sorry, but we have had it then where local authorities have been late in drafting an EHC plan because, and I had one specifically who said, well, we're waiting for advice from occupational therapy, but they're delayed. So this then pushed the whole process back. I think, well, that's actually, that's not really good enough. It's really a case of just pushing the local authority back and saying, no, this needs to happen. We didn't set the deadline. This is a legally enforced timeline. But that's often a reason why sometimes parents do get independent experts if they can get something sooner. And they go, well, we've been on a wait list for however many weeks. We just want to get on with it.
Yeah.
I understand.
Thank you, Lydia. And there's a few more questions popping up.
Oh, they've all popped up in once.
In relation to the fact sheets, are these fact sheets emailed to people's addresses, guys, or do they have to access it?
Yes, we will email basically a link to the recording, and also as long as you've got your ticket through Eventbrite. So we have your email address, then we will email that over to you with the fact sheet, and they'll also be on our website as well. If you didn't go through Eventbrite, because I think some people might have just had a direct link and you want the fact sheet, if you pop your name and your email into the chat, and then we'll add you to the list to make sure that you get a copy of the fact sheet and a recording to this as well.
Great. Hello, Sally. Not you, Sally, another Sally. Any advice for cases where schools do not observe child's needs due to phoning and masking, but are now, bear with me, but are now emotionally school avoidant due to ASD burnout? Interesting question.
Yes. Really, it's hard to advise without knowing the specifics, because potentially you would need to get experts involved, but the specific experts might well depend on who's already assessed or provided evidence. I mean, children are masking during school year, we do come across that, and then they struggle when they're at home and it all just comes out because it's just been too much. That's potentially something a range of experts can comment on, but you can have ones like educational psychologists, psychiatrists as well, that sort of thing. But I'd need to know, it's probably worth getting in contact with me directly just to ask, because that might be easier to advise on like the specifics of that.
Lydia, if you don't mind popping your email address, if you haven't already, on there, that would be.
I would do that now.
I'll let you do that first before I do another question your way.
Multitasking, yeah.
Okay. Hi. I see it. Hi. Can I appeal against LA about my son's EHCP because it is not updated and is reducing his chance to secure a college placement?
Yes. If you've had the final plan and the decision letter and you're within time to appeal, then yes, you can. Yeah, essentially that's it. The specifics of it depend on, where you are and what the date of your decision letter is, if you can appeal. What parts of the EHCP to appeal, again, depends on what's in the plan at the moment. So you can, but it's worth getting advice if you're not entirely sure about what to do with it.
Thank you. From Shane, what to do if the EHCP is not working or making a difference?
So that's really that you have options to either ask for an annual review, either an interim, or just an annual one if it's due to come up for a year anyway. Ask for an annual review. Is it not working because the child's needs have changed or the provision isn't good enough? If so, do you need to get updated evidence? Does the local authority need to get updated evidence as well, or instead as? Is it that the school isn't right? Sometimes if a child's needs have changed a lot, you can ask for a reassessment of needs from the local authority. So they go all the way back to the start of the process and they get their various experts who I read out earlier to assess, advise on level of provision needed, that sort of thing. It depends on the specifics. So again, I'd say you've got options, but it's worth getting advice about what is worth doing at this point in time, depending on where you're at.
Okay. This was from somebody I think who had been on before, Sam, and she said, thank you, Lydia. This was
I was referred to. Yeah, the digital EHCPs. Yes, so I will have a look at that, and then I will add some thoughts on the fact sheet as well for you, Sam.
Great. My LA agreed for funding for a residential placement, but they're finding it hard to secure the placement.
That's quite specific. Again, it's difficult to know without sort of saying anything without knowing specifically what's what and if anything's named in your plan or not, because the local authority can just name a type of placement in section I, and that's legally okay, but obviously you want to have it where there is a placement name, so that's where the child or young person is going to go. Yeah, there are lots of options for placements, and if it's any help, most types of placements, except for a group of independent schools, have to take a child or young person if they are named. There's a group of independent schools which are called non-approved independent schools that don't have to take if they're named, if they don't want to. Or if it's more of a case of you can't find a school to meet needs, there are options to look for schools. There are people like educational consultants who can look for schools, who sometimes our clients work with as well. It really does depend. Again, if you're not sure about what should be happening or what to do, I'd say seek advice, because it depends what's in your plan and what kind of stage you're at the moment, I guess, in terms of the EHCP, and then what your options are to try and find something.
From Rue, should there be a time lapse between the O2 assessments? So I've read that, should there be a time lapse between OT assessments of 6 months?
Well, I mean, I'm not quite sure if this is an OT who's treating or if this is an OT that's, in a local authority. 6 months is fairly regular. Like I was saying, generally within a year, that's generally considered to be regular, but it's potentially on a case-by-case basis. If a child's needs dramatically change within 6 months, then yeah, you may well need someone to assess sooner rather than another year. It depends on the situation. It depends on the need and if there's been a change of need. Otherwise, 6 months is a fairly quick time. And bearing in mind as well, if you've got an EHCP that's agreed, the provision is to be reviewed annually. So you've got, it's meant to sort of last for 12 months. But obviously, if a child's needs change in the interim, that may need to be, looked at again sooner. Again, that's quite specific. It would probably need advice on, if that's appropriate or not.
Right. I'm sorry, I'm not aware of the time, guys. Am I okay to continue asking some questions?
I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Just another 12 to go, Lydia.
Another 12, yeah.
Hopefully you can also read this while I'm reading it out, Lydia, which might help you.
Yes, yeah.
Question. So, from Alison, thank you. Our needs assessment happened during lockdown, May 2020, and the LA commissioned EP looked at reports, spoke to school, and did a phone call with me. My child is struggling to access school daily. They're now in a specialist autism unit. Unit. Would a face-to-face EP assessment be reasonable for a parent to request from the LA? If the LA refuse, how can this be challenged? Is there a time frame that is reasonable for this to happen? I'm sure lots of people went through the same thing, actually.
Yeah, I mean, lockdown did change so many things, and a lot of things were remote. We were finding that with experts we were instructing for parents that they would only assess remote because either you couldn't go into schools, you couldn't go face to face because it wasn't allowed then. Now I would say absolutely yes, face to face is always preferred than kind of the observing or not observing but like the speaking with people and reading the information. They should still be doing that, but I think face to face you get so much more. So if there hasn't been an assessment since 2020, well then I'd say yes, it probably, I mean, I suppose it also depends if there's an EHC plan. If there is, then there should be EP inputs given the needs, and that advice should be updated for annual reviews. So I don't know if there is an EHC plan. Hopefully there is, from what you said. So yes, I think asking for an EP assessment face to face, there's no reason why it could, it needs to be remote. I think pretty much all experts we're working with are going in person. If there's a reason they can't go in person, then yeah, challenge it and say, well, why not? Is there someone else in your EP team who can? In terms of challenging it, it really depends on why they're saying no to in person. The time frame for it to happen, again, it depends what stage of the process you're at. If it's for an annual review, then yes, there are timings in terms of getting information for an annual review. This has to be shared 2 weeks prior. But obviously, if you haven't got any EHCP, then really it's kind of a case by case thing of, well, how long has the request been there? what evidence is already available, and is that not good enough, or they need to get something in soon. It's worth getting advice on it because it is quite specific, but it does depend if there's an EHCP or not, I would say, is the first thing.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Rue again. Can expert evidence older than 12 months still be considered for an annual review and an SEN tribunal? Is there some movement on the 12-month cutoff?
You could put it in. There's nothing to stop you from saying this is what we've got, but bear in mind that the local authority may well have something more recent, and a tribunal is likely to go, well, this is more recent, we need to therefore factor this in when we're deciding about what the evidence says. I mean, yeah, it's not like a specific 12-month and that's it, but that's generally kind of what we work around, and generally is what kind of considered to be recent. It depends as well what the reports say. If what the reports are saying is still valid and accurate, then you could then say, well, we're happy with this, this is still applicable, the expert's happy that this hasn't changed. But obviously if needs have changed or circumstances have changed, or there's something new to consider, like a new school, or you want to move schools or something, then you're really worth getting an addendum report from the expert or someone new or whoever, because otherwise you risk not addressing all the points that the tribunal or annual review want to know. But for the annual review in particular, experts have to provide updated for the annual review. So that is going to, I think you'd struggle to say, well, we did one a year ago, because the point of annual reviews is you review them annually. So you want to get updated information for the next review. It doesn't have to necessarily be anything too lengthy, but that is the point of annual reviews, is it's updated to reflect, well, how's this last year been? So there's a slight difference between the review and the tribunal, but it's worth getting more up to date if you can. But again, it kind of depends what's already available and if it still, covers everything it needs to.
Lydia. Hello again, Asia, and I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. You can blame my Scottish accent there. My son is 18 and he has another year at his current school because they said we cannot meet his need now. They said he isn't returning in September and they are aware I haven't found a replacement.
Okay. I mean, that again it's worth getting advice on, because I'm not quite sure what. There's lots of potential options about looking for other placements, but like I say, you would need to get advice specifically, which obviously I'm happy to have a chat about directly, because again it depends what's in the EHC plan, what's if you can appeal that or not, what arrangements there are with the school, what the local authority is doing. So yeah, I think you'd need to get advice on that one specifically.
Great. And Sally's just come back to us to say thank you, Lydia. She will contact you directly. The children have mental health diagnosis and ASD diagnosis, but no observed symptoms in the school apparently.
Okay.
There we go. Keep going. Are you still okay there, Lydia?
Yeah.
Please, guys, if we run out of time, these questions will be answered for you. Hi, Rue. How can you deal with an expert who is not stating in the report what sources are relied upon for their findings, observations, and recommendations?
So if that's, it depends if that's one that you've instructed directly. If so, you go back to them and say, because that should be that shouldn't be anything too difficult for experts to say what sources they've used. We always ask it of experts we use. It seems fairly standard practice to say what information they've considered. So if it's one you've instructed, just ask them and say, as broadly as I can say, why they're not putting it in. Is there something, what's the reason? If it's a local authority one, then you can raise it again, but bear in mind they're ultimately taking their instructions from the local authority, not from you. So it's kind of something where you can ask about it. If they don't put it in, well, that kind of comes off worse on their part rather than yours. At least you've asked about it. yeah, I'm not sure what else I can really say on that, but that's generally.
Yeah, and it was, I'm so sorry I missed your last two sentences there, but it's assessing only, and is it okay if there is no time lapse? I guess you've...
I don't quite I'm trying to make sense of the... So if they're assessing, I mean, they need to prepare a report or something in writing after they've assessed, because otherwise you won't know what they found from the assessment and what their recommendations are. The time lapse, I'm not quite sure what that's in reference to. I mean, they should, yeah, I don't quite understand that, but if they're preparing their report, they should be doing so kind of as soon as possible after. That's reasonable timing, obviously, unless there's specific deadlines they need to be working towards. Yeah, not quite sure. Apologies if that doesn't help, but contact me if that doesn't quite cover everything.
And another one, how do we find an EHCP? How do we find EHCP? What stage is from LA? What the stage is at? Yeah.
Yeah, so what stage you're... If you're not sure, contact your... I mean, you should have a case officer, case worker. I appreciate they often change, so it's a best bet to go from whoever you last had correspondence from. If you can find their boss's details, or your head of the department, to ask them. Set out in writing just what stage are you at? Is there a plan? Is it drafted? Are you assessing? They should be keeping you updated though, because if throughout the process you are meant to be kept updated, that doesn't mean it always happens as well as it could do. But if they're doing an assessment, they need to tell you, get information. If they're going to issue a draft, they need to tell you or not. If you're going about amending the draft, they need to be telling you and getting your response to it if it's finalised. So check to see what you've last had from them, and then follow up with them first if you're not entirely sure, or get advice as well, because it might just need a fresh pair of eyes to look at it and go, okay, no, you're here, or you should be here, but they've delayed or they haven't contacted you. Or so sometimes correspondence from the solicitors can help, or it can just kind of nudge things forward a bit to work out what's going on, especially if there's delays in the process, which often does happen, and things just kind of float along. So yeah, have a look, see what you've got, and then ask if you're not entirely sure.
Thanks. Rue has come back, but I actually think probably it's a better idea to sort of ask specific questions to you, Lydia, in an email, or have a back and forth between the two of you. I think because it's quite specific.
Yeah, it's about an OT report.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm just having a read of it now.
Commission another OT report is quite...
I think probably worth emailing me about that one directly, because yeah, it is a bit specific.
Is that okay, Rue? Lydia will answer your questions. I think, guys, I think that's it. I cannot see any more questions.
That was quite a lot of questions.
I think, yeah, I think that's it from the chat.
Lovely. So thank you very much, Lydia. That was again a very useful webinar. Thank you, Janet, for asking all of those questions, and thank you, Jackie, in the background. And thank you everybody for joining as well. It's always really nice to see everybody who's so interested in these. And we will send out, as I say, we'll send out a link to everybody who signed up on Eventbrite. We'll send when we've got it live on our website, and we also have the fact sheet. And on our website, we do also have previous webinars that Lydia has done all around EHCPs. And so if you're interested in learning a bit more, they are all very, very useful, and they all have fact sheets with them as well. So do take a look. And yeah, if you haven't signed up with Eventbrite, you could just email our general email, which is just info@snapcare.co.uk, to request that we put your details on the webinar list, and then we can send you all of the links. So that's great. Well, thank you again, Lydia. That was brilliant, and I hope we'll have you back again a bit sooner next time for another session, because they are always so useful, and I think that they do really just I think they just reflect just how much information parents need. And I always find it's you know, you guys have a lot, you parents have a lot to kind of like deal with, and a lot of information. You have to become experts in your own in all of these different fields yourselves, you know. So I think these webinars are hopefully very helpful in terms of just getting, you know, giving you some of that information. And yes, anybody can contact Lydia if you have specific questions, and she'll be happy to answer you. Super. Well, we'll say goodbye now. Thank you for joining us, everybody, and I hope everybody is coping with this hot weather. It's a little bit cooler today, and we hope to see you soon at a future webinar. Bye for now.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.